Of course, below is come part 1 of your story, written exactly to your specifications. No headings. Around 1,400 words. Simple. Natural English, human-centric and engaging third-person storytelling. Avoids policy-violating content. Uses no cliched or overused names since you've asked for it in a separate document. I'll present it cleanly here as if it were that document, ready for you to copy into your preferred format. The bell rang just after 8 a.m., sharp and tinny, echoing through the cracked linoleum halls of Jefferson High. Students shuffled in like a slow-moving river, backpacks slung low, hoods up, earbuds in. Among them walked a girl most didn't even notice. She moved quietly, eyes down, shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to fold herself into the background. Her name wasn't shouted in hallways or scribbled in yearbook notes. To many, she was just that quiet one, the girl who sat in the back corner of room 214, always wearing the same soft gray hoodie, even when the sun blazed outside. She didn't talk much. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she'd learned long ago that silence could be safer than speech. In her old neighborhood, speaking up had once cost her family everything. So here, in this new school, in this new town, she chose stillness. She listened more than she spoke, watched more than she reacted, took notes, turned in homework on time, never caused a scene. Teachers called her polite or well-behaved, but none of them really saw her. Not the way she truly was. Then there was him. He wasn't the biggest kid in school, but he carried himself like he owned the place. Loud laugh, louder voice, always surrounded by a shifting group of followers who laughed at his jokes a little too hard. He'd been held back once, maybe twice, no one was sure. But he wore that like a badge, as if repeating a grade made him tougher. He liked attention, and if he couldn't get it by being liked, he'd settle for being feared. At first, his teasing was small. A snicker when she dropped her pencil. A fake cough that sounded like Ghost when she walked by. He called her Shadow once and his friends laughed. She didn't flinch. Didn't look up. Just kept writing in her notebook like the air around her was empty. That's what really got under his skin. Not her silence, but how it refused to break. Most kids cried, snapped back, or at least showed they were hurt. But she gave him nothing. No reaction. No satisfaction. And that silence began to feel like a challenge. So he turned up the heat. He'd accidentally bump her desk as he passed, sending her pens clattering to the floor. Once he stole her history worksheet and waved it over his head like a trophy, while she sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the whiteboard. The teacher told him to give it back. He did, with a smirk and a whispered, "What's wrong?" "Cat got your tongue?" She took the paper without a word, smoothed it out, continued writing. Inside, though, she wasn't as calm as she looked. Her heart pounded every time he came near. Her stomach twisted when his shadow fell across her desk. But she'd made a promise to herself when she transferred here. No more running. No more letting fear decide her life. So she stayed, and she watched. What he didn't know was that quiet people often see more than loud ones. While he was busy performing for his audience, she noticed things. Like how his smile never reached his eyes. How he checked his phone constantly like he was waiting for someone to text back. How sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, his shoulders slumped just a little, as if the weight of pretending was getting heavy. But none of that mattered to him in that classroom. All he saw was someone he could push around without consequence. The teachers were tired. The principal was overwhelmed. And she never complained. So why stop? Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. It was study hall. Quiet period supposed to be for reading or finishing assignments. Most kids had their heads down or were scrolling on phones under desks. She was sketching in the margins of her notebook. A bird in flight, wings wide, free. It was something she did when her mind needed space. He walked in late, as usual, slamming the door just enough to make everyone jump. His mood was off. Something had happened before class. Maybe a bad grade. Maybe a fight at home. Whatever it was, he needed to feel powerful again, and she was right there. He strolled past her desk, then stopped. "Still drawing your little cartoons, Shadow?" he said, loud enough for the row behind them to hear. She didn't answer. Didn't look up. He leaned down, voice dropping to a growl. "I'm talking to you." Still nothing. That's when he lost it. In one quick motion, he grabbed the edge of her chair and yanked it backward. The legs scraped the floor with a screech and she tumbled sideways, hitting the ground hard. Her notebook flew open. Her glasses, thin wire frames she'd taped back together twice, slid off and cracked against the tile. A few kids gasped. Someone muttered, "Dude, chill." But no one moved to help. He stood over her, chest puffed out like he'd won something. "You think you're too good to talk to me, huh? You act like you're better than everyone, but you're just nothing." She stayed on the floor for a long moment, breathing slowly. Her knee stung. Her palms were scraped. But worse than the pain was the feeling of being watched, of being exposed. She hated that more than anything. Then slowly she pushed herself up. She didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't even look at him. Instead, she picked up her glasses, examined the new crack in the left lens, and slipped them back on. She gathered her papers, smoothed her hoodie, and walked out of the room, head high, step steady, as if nothing had happened. But something had, because for the first time, he didn't feel strong. He felt small and confused. Why wasn't she scared? Why wasn't she broken? What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that she'd already survived worse. Much worse. And the girl standing in that hallway wasn't fragile. She was waiting. Not for revenge, but for the moment when the truth would speak for itself. And it would. Sooner than he thought. For now, though, she just needed to breathe. She stepped outside into the weak October sun and closed her eyes. The wind tugged at her hoodie. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. Normal sounds, safe sounds. She wasn't going to run this time. She wasn't going to hide because silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the calm before everything changes. The hallway felt longer than usual that morning. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow on scuffed lockers and peeling posters advertising a bake sale from last month. Students milled around, laughing, shoving each other playfully, swapping snacks. But she walked through it all like she was underwater. Sounds were muffled, movement slow. Her mind kept circling back to the fall, the crack of her glasses, the way the room had gone quiet for just a second before returning to normal, as if nothing had happened. She didn't go to the nurse. Didn't report it to the office. She just went to her next class, sat in her usual seat and opened her notebook like any other day. But inside something had shifted. Not anger. She'd felt that before and it never helped. This was different. It was clarity. She'd stayed quiet to protect herself, to avoid drawing attention, to give her family a chance at peace. But silence only worked if the world respected it. And clearly it didn't. Back in room 214, the boy who'd shoved her was restless. He hadn't slept well. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing up, not crying, not shouting, just walking away like he was nothing. That look in her eyes wasn't fear. It was disappointment. And that stung worse than any insult he'd ever thrown. He tried to act normal, cracked a joke in math class, high-fived a friend between periods. But his usual swagger felt forced, like a costume that didn't fit anymore. Even his crew noticed. "You good?" one asked at lunch. He just grunted and stabbed at his fries. He told himself she was just weird, too quiet, probably didn't even feel pain like normal people. But deep down, a small, uncomfortable voice whispered, "What if she's not the weak one here?" Meanwhile, a few students couldn't stop thinking about what they'd seen. One girl had filmed part of it on her phone, not to mock, but because it felt wrong and she didn't know what else to do. She showed it to her older sister that night. Her sister, a college student studying social work, watched it twice, then said quietly, "That's assault. You should tell someone." The next day, whispers started spreading. Not loud rumors, but hushed conversations in corners. "Did you see what happened in study hall?" "Yeah, he totally flipped her chair. She didn't even cry. I heard she transferred here after something bad happened back home." No one knew the full story, but for the first time people were looking at her, not as that quiet girl, but as someone who'd been wronged. She noticed the change. A classmate held the door for her. Another offered her a spare pencil when hers broke. Small things, but they mattered. Still, she kept her guard up. Kindness could disappear as fast as it appeared. Then came the assembly. It was supposed to be about digital citizenship. Think before you post. Be kind online. The usual. But halfway through, the principal paused, cleared his throat, and said something unexpected. Recently, an incident occurred in one of our classrooms that crossed the line from teasing to physical aggression. We take student safety seriously. If you witnessed anything, please come forward. He didn't name names. But everyone knew. After the assembly, 3 students went to the counselor's office. One handed over a phone with a short video. Another described what happened. The third just said she didn't do anything, he just lost it. The school had no choice but to act. That afternoon, the boy was called to the office. His stomach dropped. He'd been in trouble before, detentions, warnings, but this felt different. The vice principal didn't yell, just sat quietly, hands folded, and said, "We have video. We have witnesses. What do you have to say?" He mumbled something about just messing around, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Back in class, she was asked to step out too. The counselor spoke gently, offering support, asking if she wanted to press charges or file a formal complaint. She shook her head. "I just want it to stop," she said softly. But stopping it wasn't that simple. At home that night, her little brother asked, "Did someone hurt you at school?" He'd heard kids talking at his middle school. She hesitated, then nodded. He looked up at her with wide eyes and said, "Are you going to fight back?" She knelt beside him. "Not with fists," she said, "but I won't let anyone make me feel small again." The next morning, the boy didn't show up to first period. Rumor was he'd been suspended for 3 days. Some kids cheered. Others stayed quiet. She didn't celebrate. She just felt tired. But something else was happening. Something she hadn't planned. A teacher she barely knew stopped her after class. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," she said, handing her a new pair of glasses. Same style, same thin wire frames. The school ordered them. No questions asked. Another student slid a note onto her desk. "You're brave." "I wish I could be like you." She didn't feel brave. She felt exposed, vulnerable. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Meanwhile, miles away, the boy sat on his front steps, phone in hand, scrolling through messages from friends, some defending him, others saying he'd gone too far. His mom had yelled at him last night, not just about the shove, but about how he'd been acting for months. Angry, distant, always picking fights. "You think being loud makes you strong?" she'd said. "Real strength is knowing when to stop." He didn't have an answer. On the 3rd day of his suspension, he saw a news clip his cousin sent him. It was local from 2 years ago, a young girl testifying in court. Calm voice, straight back. Eyes locked on a man accused of arson and threats. The reporter called her the key witness who helped dismantle a neighborhood intimidation ring. The girl in the video looked younger, her hair in braids, but there was no mistaking those eyes. His stomach twisted. That was her. He watched it 3 times. Each time he saw something new, not just courage, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying too much too soon. When he returned to school, he expected her to avoid him, to glare, to have the whole school turned against him, but she did none of those things. She walked into room 214 like always, sat in her seat, and opened her notebook. When their eyes met, just for a second, he looked away first. What he didn't know was that she wasn't waiting for him to apologize. She wasn't waiting for revenge. She was waiting to see if he could change, and change, she knew, never starts with a shout. It starts with a choice. The bell rang. The teacher began the lesson. Outside, leaves swirled in the wind. And in that ordinary classroom, something quiet but powerful had already begun to shift. Not because of violence, but because one girl refused to be erased and one boy finally saw what he'd been blind to all along. Of course, below is more part 3 of your story, written exactly to your specifications. No headings, around 1,400 words, simple, natural English, human-centric and engaging, third-person storytelling. Avoids policy-violating content, uses no cliched or overused names, presented as a clean, standalone document, ready for you to copy or save. The school buzzed with a different kind of energy now. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a quiet shift like the air before a storm clears. People still talked, still laughed in the halls, but there was less shoving, fewer snide remarks tossed over shoulders. Teachers noticed it too. Even the lunchroom felt calmer, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what came next. She didn't bring it up, didn't tell her story in homeroom or post about it online, but somehow it got out anyway. Not all at once, but in pieces, like a puzzle slowly coming together. A student from another school recognized her from an old news segment their parent had saved. Someone else remembered reading about a firebombing case in the next county, how a young witness had stood firm despite threats. Then came the video, the courtroom footage, grainy but clear, circulating quietly among parents and staff. It wasn't shared to make her famous. It was shared because it explained everything. 2 years earlier, her family had lived in a neighborhood where silence was survival. Gangs didn't just deal drugs, they controlled blocks, scared shop owners, burned houses of anyone who spoke up. Her uncle had tried to report them. A week later, their porch went up in flames. No one was hurt, but the message was clear: stay quiet or worse would come. She was 13 then. Small for her age, but when detectives came asking questions, she didn't hide. She remembered license plates, voices, the way one man always wore a red baseball cap even indoors. While adults hesitated, afraid of retaliation, she stepped forward. Not for glory, for safety. For her little brother, who'd woken up screaming that night. For her mom, who cried in the kitchen long after the firefighters left. She testified alone. No dramatic music, no cheering crowd, just a courtroom full of strangers and a man who glared at her like she'd stolen something from him. But she didn't flinch. She spoke clearly, calmly. And when the judge sentenced him to 15 years, she didn't cheer. She just went home and helped her mom sweep up the last of the soot from the porch. After that, threats kept coming. Notes slipped under doors, calls in the middle of the night. So they moved, changed their number, enrolled her in a new school under a slightly different spelling of her last name. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to be a kid again, to worry about algebra tests and whether her shoes matched, not whether someone was watching her from the street. That's why she stayed quiet at Jefferson High. Not because she was weak, but because she'd already carried too much. She wanted peace, not another battle. But peace doesn't always come from hiding. Sometimes it comes from being seen for who you really are. When the truth surfaced, it didn't feel like exposure. It felt like relief. Kids who'd ignored her for months now looked at her with something like awe, but also respect. Not the kind that puts someone on a pedestal, but the kind that says, I see what you've been through and I won't pretend it didn't happen. Even the teachers changed. One invited her to help lead a discussion on civic courage in history class, not as a victim, but as someone who understood what it meant to stand up when it mattered. She agreed, but only if they focused on everyday bravery, not just her story. Most heroes don't wear capes, she said quietly. They just do the right thing when no one's watching. Meanwhile, the boy who'd shoved her was lost in his own thoughts. He'd watched that courtroom video over and over. He saw how young she looked, how steady her voice was, how she never raised it even when describing fear. He thought about his own life, how he yelled to feel heard, how he pushed people away before they could reject him. He'd mistaken noise for strength, chaos for control. Now he saw the difference. He didn't go around bragging about his suspension or pretending it didn't matter. He kept to himself more, spent lunch periods in the library, actually did his homework. His friends drifted away at first, confused by the change. But one stuck around, a kid who'd once laughed at his jokes but now just said, "You good, man?" And for the first time he answered honestly, "I'm trying." Back in class, she noticed the shift too. He didn't look at her with anger anymore. Just something quieter, maybe shame, maybe curiosity. She didn't forgive him yet. Forgiveness wasn't something you handed out like candy, but she saw the effort, and that mattered. One afternoon after school, she stayed late to finish a project. The hallway was nearly empty when she walked out, backpack slung over one shoulder. He was at his locker, head down, fiddling with the combination. They were alone. For a second, neither moved. Then he spoke, voice low, almost shy. "I saw the video," she stopped. "Didn't turn. Didn't run. Just waited. I didn't know," he said. "About any of it," she turned slowly. Looked at him, not with judgment, but with tired honesty. "You didn't ask," he nodded. Swallowed hard. "I thought you were just easy to pick on. Because you didn't fight back." "I did fight back," she said. "Just not the way you expected." He had no answer to that. Just stood there, keys dangling from his hand. She walked past him but paused at the end of the hall. "Strength isn't about making others small," she said without looking back. "It's about lifting yourself up without tearing anyone else down." Then she was gone, footsteps echoing softly down the empty corridor. He stood there a long time after she left, staring at his locker like it held answers. Maybe it didn't. But for the first time he wanted to find them. At home that night, she told her mom what happened, not the shove, but the conversation. Her mom hugged her tight and said, "You're not that scared little girl anymore, are you?" She shook her head. "No, but I'm not trying to be tough either. I just want to be real." And that was enough, because the truth has a way of changing things, not with explosions, but with quiet ripples. One person sees it, then another, then a whole room, and soon the story isn't just about what was done to someone. It's about who they really are and who they help others become. In that school, something old was ending, and something new, fragile, honest, human, was just beginning to grow. Of course, below is our Part 4 of your story, written exactly to your specifications. No headings. Around 1,400 words. Simple, natural English, human-centric, and engaging third-person storytelling. Avoids policy-violating content. Uses no cliched or overused names, presented as a clean, standalone document ready for you to copy or save. The school didn't hold a big assembly. There was no dramatic confrontation in the cafeteria or tearful apology over a loudspeaker. What happened next was quieter, slower, but far more real. After the video surfaced and the truth about her past settled into the hallways like morning light, the administration had a choice: sweep it under the rug or do something meaningful. For once, they chose the harder path. A counselor reached out, not just to her, but to him too. Not to punish, but to ask, "What do you both need now?" She didn't want him expelled. Didn't want him labeled a monster. "He made a bad choice," she told the counselor. "But that doesn't mean he's a bad person." Those words surprised even her. She hadn't planned to say them. They just came out like something her younger self needed to hear too. So the school arranged a restorative circle, a small group. Just the two of them. A counselor and 2 neutral student mediators from the peer support team. No audience, no phones. Just chairs in a quiet room. Sunlight filtering through half-closed blinds. He walked in first. Shoulders tight. Eyes on the floor. He'd worn his best shirt. Not because he cared about looking good, but because he wanted to show he took this seriously. When she entered a minute later, calm and steady as always, he didn't look up right away. He wasn't sure he deserved to. They sat across from each other. Silence stretched for a few seconds. Not awkward, just heavy with everything left unsaid. The counselor spoke first. "This isn't about blame. It's about understanding. About making things right, not just moving on." He nodded, fingers twisting in his lap. She spoke next, not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. "When you shoved me, it wasn't just about that moment. It reminded me of times when people thought I didn't matter, when they hurt my family because we spoke up. I stayed quiet here because I wanted peace, not more pain. But your actions made me feel invisible again." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know any of that," he said, voice rough. I don't know what I thought. That you didn't care. That you were just weird for not reacting." "I cared," she said. "I just didn't want to give you the satisfaction of seeing me break." He looked up then, really looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded raw, real. "I was angry, at home at myself, and I took it out on you because you didn't fight back. That was cowardly." She didn't smile. Didn't say it's okay, but she nodded. "Apologies don't fix everything," she said. "But they're a start." The conversation lasted nearly an hour. They talked about fear, about pride, about how hard it is to ask for help when you've spent your whole life pretending you don't need it. He admitted he'd been acting out for months. His dad had left, his grades were slipping, and he didn't know how to say any of it without sounding weak. She shared how hard it was to trust people after being threatened just for telling the truth. By the end, neither of them had all the answers, but something had shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, but something deeper, mutual respect. Afterward, the school didn't post about it on social media. Didn't turn it into a lesson for the whole student body. They let it stay personal, and that's what made it stick. Back in class the next week, things were different. He didn't sit near her, he gave her space, but he held the door when she entered. Didn't make jokes at anyone's expense. When someone mocked a new kid for his accent, he surprised everyone by saying, "Cut it out." "That's not funny." The room went quiet. Then someone else chimed in, "Yeah, leave him alone." A small moment, but it mattered. She started speaking up more, not just in class, but in the hallways. When she saw a freshman being cornered near the lockers, she didn't walk past. She stepped in. "You okay?" she asked gently. The girl nodded, eyes wide with relief. Later, that same girl left a folded note in her locker. "Thank you for seeing me." Teachers noticed the change, too. One asked her to help design a student-led workshop on bystander intervention, not as a victim, but as someone who understood courage in its many forms. She agreed, but only if it focused on listening, not lecturing. "Real change starts when we stop assuming we know someone's story," she told the planning group. At home, her little brother asked if the mean kid was still bothering her. She shook her head. "He's trying," she said. "And that's something." Her mom watched her carefully over dinner that night. "You seem lighter," she said. She thought about it. "I'm not carrying it alone anymore," she replied. Meanwhile, he started showing up to school on time, turned in assignments, even joined the after-school tech club, something he'd always been curious about but never tried because it wasn't cool. Now he didn't care as much about cool. He cared about feeling like he belonged without having to shove his way in. One afternoon, he saw her helping a teacher carry books to the library. He almost walked past. Old habits die hard, but then he stopped. "Need a hand?" he asked, voice low. She looked surprised, then nodded. They walked in silence for a bit, arms full of novels and textbooks. At the library door, she said, "Thanks." He shrugged. "Just returning the favor." "For what?" she asked. "For showing me that quiet doesn't mean weak." She smiled then, small but real. "And loud doesn't mean strong." They both knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect. Old patterns don't vanish overnight. But they'd taken the first real step, not away from each other, but toward something better. And in a school that once felt like a battleground of invisible wounds, two people had chosen healing over hurt. Not with grand speeches or viral moments, but with honesty, humility, and the quiet courage to say, "I was wrong. I see you now." That kind of change doesn't make headlines, but it changes lives. And sometimes that's enough. Of course, below is my Part 5 acts, the final part of your story. Written exactly to your specifications. No headings. Around 1,400 words. Simple. Natural English, human-centric and engaging. Third-person storytelling avoids policy-violating content. Uses no cliched or overused names. Presented as a clean, standalone document ready for you to copy or save. Spring came quietly to Jefferson High. The air softened. Buds pushed through bare branches. Students traded heavy jackets for light hoodies, and the courtyard filled again with lunchtime chatter, basketball thumps, and the occasional burst of laughter that carried all the way to the science wing. But something deeper had changed too, something you couldn't see, only feel. It wasn't that bullying vanished overnight. Schools don't work like that. But the tone had shifted. Kids looked out for each other more. Teachers paid closer attention to the quiet ones, not just the loud ones. And in room 214, where it had all begun, the atmosphere was different, calmer, kinder, like a room that had learned to breathe again. She still sat in the back corner, but now she raised her hand sometimes. Not to show off, but to ask thoughtful questions or offer help when someone was stuck. She joined the peer mediation team, not as a poster child for resilience, but because she understood what it felt like to be unheard, and she wanted to make sure others didn't feel that way. During training, she told the group, "Most people don't need fixing. They just need someone to listen without judging." Her presence alone changed things. When a new student arrived, shy, with a stutter and mismatched shoes, the group didn't whisper or stare. One girl remembered how she'd once felt invisible too and walked over to say, "Hey, I saved you a seat." It wasn't grand. It was human. And it mattered. As for him, he never became the star of the school. He didn't need to. He showed up, did his work, stopped trying to be the loudest voice in the room and started listening instead. He even apologized to a kid he'd mocked months earlier. Just a quiet "I was wrong" between classes, no audience, no fanfare. The other kid nodded, surprised but grateful. That small act rippled further than either of them knew. He started eating lunch with a different crowd. Kids who talked about video games, music, even homework. No one needed to be the tough guy there. They just were. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he could just be himself. Messy, uncertain, trying. And that was enough. One afternoon, the school hosted a student-led forum on respect and community. She helped organize it, but didn't speak from the front. Instead, she sat in the circle with everyone else. listening as classmates shared stories about being left out, about saying the wrong thing, about learning to do better. When it was his turn, he didn't make excuses. "I thought being mean made me strong," he said, voice low but clear. "But real strength is owning your mistakes and trying to grow." "I'm still learning." No one clapped. No one needed to. The silence that followed was full of understanding. Afterward, a teacher pulled her aside. "You've changed this place," she said gently. She shook her head. "I didn't change it. We all did. I just reminded people that quiet doesn't mean nothing's going on inside." At home, life settled into a new rhythm. Her little brother started talking about school like it was a place he belonged, not just a place he had to go. Her mom smiled more, slept easier, and she finally stopped looking over her shoulder. The past hadn't disappeared, it never does, but it no longer defined her. She was more than what had been done to her. She was who she chose to be now. Graduation wasn't far off. Seniors hung banners, signed yearbooks, took awkward photos under the bleachers. She didn't plan to give a speech or win an award. But when the class voted for most likely to make a difference, her name appeared on half the ballots. She didn't tell anyone, just tucked the note into her journal, next to sketches of birds in flight. On the last day of school, she walked through the halls one final time. Lockers stood open, emptied of notebooks and forgotten snacks. Posters curled at the edges. In room 214, the desks were pushed to the sides for summer cleaning. He was there, wiping down whiteboards with a rag, volunteering for extra credit. They saw each other at the same time. He stopped. She paused. No words were needed. But he nodded, slow, respectful. She returned it just as quiet. Then she turned and walked out into the sunlight, backpack light on her shoulders, the wind warm on her face. She didn't look back. Not because she was leaving something behind, but because she was walking toward something ahead. Months later, a local community center started a youth leadership program. Its focus? Teaching kids how to resolve conflict without violence, how to speak up without tearing others down. She was one of the first mentors. He signed up as a volunteer assistant. They didn't work side by side every day, but when their paths crossed, there was no tension, just quiet acknowledgement of how far they'd both come. People sometimes ask if she forgave him. She doesn't answer with a yes or no. Forgiveness, she's learned, isn't a single moment. It's a choice you make again and again, not for the other person, but for yourself. To stop carrying anger like a stone in your pocket, to believe people can change even when they've hurt you. And he still carries that courtroom video in his mind, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder. A reminder that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sits quietly in the back of a classroom, waiting for the world to catch up. Jefferson High didn't become perfect. No school does. But it became a place where kindness was noticed, where silence was respected, and where one girl's refusal to be broken helped others find their own strength. Her story never went viral. There were no news crews or hashtags. But in the lives she touched, in the kids who now speak up, who listen more, who choose peace over power, her impact lives on. And that's the thing about real change. It doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs one person to stand firm, one person to choose better, and the rest to follow, not out of fear, but out of hope. In the end, she didn't need to prove who she really was. She just lived it. And that was more than enough.